We are getting to a point where repurposing your podcast is not just a nice to have. It's something that we need to be doing as business owners because we're already creating incredible content with our podcast, and we need to be able to share it in all of the different places or the few places, depending on how many places you want to be in, and being really strategic about it. But where do we begin? There are so many options, so many ideas, and copying and pasting our content from one platform to another is not going to cut it. Today, we have Felly Day sharing some really strategic ways that we can take short form content or long form content, it's up to us, and repurpose that into other types of content. We also talk about the few places that you definitely need to be repurposing your podcast, as well as some ways to use your content to pitch yourself to be on other podcasts, which I am all for, since that's the number one way to quickly grow your show. Please join me in welcoming Felly Day to the podcast. Welcome to Podcasting Unlocked, the show for purpose-driven podcasters. I'm Alicia Galati, founder of Galati Media, and I'm here to share actionable strategies to help you amplify your message and grow your audience. Hello, Felly. I'm so excited to chat with you today. If you could start by telling everyone a bit about you, who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
So my name is Felly Day. I run a content repurposing agency. We take your existing content and make new content with it. And I run a podcast called The Unprofessional Entrepreneur, where we're all about doing business unprofessionally. Basically, I'm not here to perform like a circus animal. So whatever I feel like doing, that's how we market our businesses.
I feel like all the millennial business owners who are like, I do not want to dance on TikTok are feeling that in their souls because I know I do. So when you talk repurposing, I know business owners, they have to have that one core piece of content. For some people, it might be a podcast. What are some other types of core content that they can use as that initial content that can then be repurposed?
I believe that any content can be your core content. I don't think it has to be long form content like podcast or YouTube or blogs. Your core content should be the content you like to create the most because it's the one that you'll be the most consistent with creating. If that is your 10-second dancing reels, go for it. We can still repurpose short to long.
So let's talk about that for a bit because I love controversy. I'm all for it. And positively disagreeing with people. I told someone the other day, I was on someone's podcast, and he was like, what about busy business owners who are maybe not ready to start a podcast or trying to figure out how to manage their time with a podcast? I was like, a podcast can be 10 minutes. It does not have to be like, in the case of this person, he has hour-long videos, full conversations, which by the end, I'm exhausted. I'm like, you can do 10 minutes or less. I've seen podcasts that are 3 minutes, podcasts that are 5 minutes. You get to choose what works for you. And if you're short on time, then spending 2 hours a month to create an entire month's worth of 10 minutes or less content to then repurpose is a great strategy. But I don't think enough people talk about that. So I love that you're talking about this. What are some of those, like you mentioned, the dancing videos to repurpose to long, but say someone has a 3-minute episode where they maybe answer one question in their industry. How can they turn something that's small into something bigger, right? Because we do tend to see it reversed. What are some strategies around taking that shorter content to bigger content?
So taking shorter content to longer content obviously depends what your original content is. But if it was, say, you had a 3-minute podcast episode answering a specific question, my approach to repurposing is to change the angle. If you were answering a question, chances are you were answering like an objection, right? And so then change that objection into a case study, change that objection into a limiting belief, like rephrase the question into this is what you're thinking right now, or this is the mistake you're making right now, and that's why you think this isn't possible for you, right? So changing the angle of what that original piece of content was is what makes it possible to repurpose short to long. And also, it's about adding context, right? Like if you wanted to turn your 3-minute podcast episode into a full blog post, you're going to need to tell the story, back it up, show examples. When you take something short and turn it longer, you're expanding. When we see those reels that are 5 seconds long and just have bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, you're adding paragraphs under those bullets. If you're answering a question, you're looking, where can I add more into this? Like adding a case study, examples of use cases. If you're like, okay, so you feel this way. If you are a social media manager that wants to start a podcast and you only have so much time, this is how you can make it work for you. And like give longer stories essentially of you answered that question succinctly. Like now let's hit it from all angles.
What are your thoughts on someone maybe, and this is a cringing example because my brain is like, don't do this, but I'm all for everybody doing whatever works for them, right? But if someone say they want to send themselves a voice note to share and explain, like I'm an external processor, so a podcast works great for me, but say they are not ready to share so much of themselves on audio, or maybe they're trying to do video too and they're feeling really weird on video, right? We all have our little quirks. What are your thoughts on voice noting examples? I wanted to share 3 tips. I did a reel on it. Typing it is exhausting because my brain's trying to write it and think about it. Let me just voice note it to myself, then plug it into something like Gemini, ChatGPT, etc., to then rewrite it as a blog post. What are your thoughts on reworking it that way for people?
My only problem with a voice note or a podcast transcript, like audio transcript to written content, is we don't talk like we write. It can work for emails, it can work for social content, but when it comes to a blog, you need to be careful in making sure that you structure headlines so that it's skimmable. Everybody's skimming blogs. You need to put things together in a way that works for blogs, that maybe you recording voice to text isn't actually going to read well, but it's possible. You just need to edit it.
I tell people to edit anything that comes out
Mhm.
of AI anyway.
Mm.
Because I'm like, it's your intern. We don't just copy and paste what the unpaid intern gives
Mhm.
us. No, please don't do that. So that's a good strategy. What if there's someone who is like, I have got this podcast episode with a guest. What are some ways that we can repurpose those guest episodes? Because I know sometimes those conversations can go through the woods and around the rivers. And it gets a little wild sometimes where you're covering so many different topics. So, what are some strategies that we can use to repurpose those that aren't your typical? Here's a clip from the video, because even now we're seeing while that worked 2 years ago, it's not working anymore. What are some ways that we can repurpose those?
So, when it comes to podcast episodes, guest or solo, focus on the individual gems. You want to find those moments within the episode and expand that. It could be a tangent, it could be the answer to one question. Take this episode, for example. Every new question you ask, new piece of content. And you can have the overarching blog post about the episode or the video, go listen to the full episode. But when you're making the content that is not pointing back directly to the episode, and it's like positioning you as the educator or positioning your guest as an educator, you want to focus on one bite they said and turn that into the piece of content. Expand on that piece of value they answered in that question.
Oh, I love that. I heard someone recently talk about how he's doubling down on YouTube for his podcast. While he's got his podcast on there, he will take 8 to 10 minute segments of the 45-minute conversation and post those as questions so that YouTube's like, oh, it's answering this question. That doesn't necessarily redirect back to podcast listeners, but could just be, hey, I'm trying to grow my YouTube following and position myself and the people I'm interviewing as experts in this field. And I thought that was such an interesting approach. And also, if you don't have a team, can feel really overwhelming.
Mhm.
So, what are some very basic things that we should be inclined to maybe do?
So I really like that approach with YouTube, taking the long one and cutting it into sections that you can then reshare, like the 10-minute clip, the 8-minute clip, and make it great for SEO. The question as the title instead of the whole episode, right? Like we were saying, if you were to be doing emails or carousels, it's like taking the 45-minute episode, breaking it into the sections of 10 minutes, taking those 10-minute sections and turning them into emails for each question, carousels for each question, but then also changing the angle of it, right? If you're doing objection-based questions, you want to tell case studies, address the mistakes people are making, address the limiting beliefs people are having, tell an inspirational story, like tell your story, tell a client story, share like your unpopular opinion. That's something that we all love to see on social media, right? Like take one phrase, like copy pasting your content isn't repurposing content, and make that into an entire carousel where that's the front page. It stops the scroll. People are like, wait, what? That's not what I think,
Mhm.
right? And it gets them scrolling, and then you dive into your belief around that. Taking the original video, taking the questions, the words from that video, and flipping the script on the way you were approaching that topic.
Yes, I love that. And also be aware that people might disagree with you too.
Mm,
I think we have
always.
to be open to that with social media, which is one reason why I prefer podcasting, because then I don't have that instant feedback of like people's opinions at me. I remember I gave a polarizing opinion that not everyone should have a podcast.
Mm.
Someone took that and was like, don't listen to people like her. And I was like, did you read anything I said afterwards? I said, you need to have a plan. Don't just throw spaghetti at the wall and hope it sticks. You have to actually put in effort. And this is why most people fail. I'm not saying you shouldn't if you really want to, but think about it first. I've told people before who have come to me and said, I want you to launch my podcast. Here's my money. And I said, actually, I don't think you're ready yet. I think you need to get clearer on your message first. And then you can come to me. I'm more than happy to help you. But maybe you need to work with this other person first to get clear on this message, or guest on some podcasts to get clear on your message. You have to be open to the idea that people are going to disagree with you.
Oh, and it's like the classic of they only read the headline and not the rest of the text. It's going to happen. It's what social media does.
Yes, sadly. So that's a great strategy. I love that idea. If people are like, I don't know how to have a bank of stories or a bank of ideas, or I'm trying to create as much content as I possibly can, and I'm feeling like I'm drowning. What are your thoughts on that and tips for them who are feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, or like they're already creating so much content?
My first thought is you should hire me.
Yes.
My second thought is to just scroll back 6 months.
Mm.
Look through your content. What did you say? What could you repeat? What did you really like? If you start reading your old content, it's going to inspire you, or at least it should. The amount of times that people scroll back and they're like, I have an updated story, or I have a new take on that, or I changed my mind on this approach I used to have. But if you just scroll back through your content or go through your analytics, see what's your most listened to podcast episode, what's the episode that everybody always shares on social media and tags you and refers to their friends, re-listen to that episode. What did you say? What can be repeated? What did you hint at that could be a whole new episode you could dive in deeper on, right? So if you don't want to hire me, then your own content should be your biggest inspiration.
Yes, I love that. I do this a lot with our clients where we'll look at their podcast analytics. One client noticed that an episode that was 2 years old was getting a lot of traction, and it was all about burnout. She was like, oh, interesting. My audience is really interested in this. Cool. I have a family trip coming up. Let me just re-release that episode, put a new intro to it, reshare it on social media, and get people who are maybe not going back and listening to it, because it sounds like people are really struggling with this right now. I love that idea, especially when we're in summertime when this releases. Holidays are happening, kids are out of school, our lives are super busy. Now is the best time to show up on social media and your podcast because so many people take breaks during this time that there's a lot less quote unquote competition, a lot more room for your voice, I should say, to be able to be heard. Repurposing past content that you're like, oh, wait, people are actually interested in this. Huh, curious. Because you might be like on to the next, right? Because your brain's just like, all right, I've got all these
Mm.
ideas. Let's just keep going. Let your audience guide you. Let your data guide you. Let your past content guide you to move forward. I love that idea. What are some ways that are really working right now for repurposing that we haven't talked about yet?
It's funny when you were talking about resharing old episodes. I got married last year and I took a month off.
Congrats.
Thanks. And what I did was take my guest episodes. This is something not enough people are taking advantage of. And when I say guest, I mean like shows that I guested on. So like this episode, not
Right.
my episodes. When you're interviewed, you talk about your offers differently than when it's you talking about your offer. So if like in terms of creating content or what to put out on your podcast, I would reshare, if you want to take a break, reshare interviews you did on other people's shows, because if you ask a host, they will send it to you. No one said no to
Yep.
me when I asked. Repurpose that content for your own socials, because I bet you said something, because I don't know about you, but like when I'm speaking, when I'm asked and activated, I say things that aren't my regular messaging. That content can be your best seller.
Yeah.
Resharing it can be some of your best episodes.
Yes. And your audience isn't always necessarily going to listen to all of those episodes. We see it a lot with the bigger podcast hosts that are like, hey, I'm on another episode, but they're on 50 in a year. And their audience doesn't always listen to all of them. Your audience is the same. They're not always going to listen just because you put it in your email or shared it on social. Not everybody got it. And even if they did, it's always a good reminder too, because it probably happened months ago. And
Mhm.
our brains need to hear things multiple times. Like we said at the beginning, we're telling people this so many times. You got to repurpose your content. There's episodes on this topic and different strategies, but I think we've got some really good ideas here on ways to do it now, right? Where we're trying to do a little less in our businesses, not necessarily trying to keep up with the Joneses, but really being intentional about the places that we are and also having that original content be a space that we enjoy showing up because it does allow us to be consistent. So I love that so much. What are some ways that we could maybe repurpose our content when we are pitching ourselves to be on other podcasts? Because I talk a lot about how you don't always necessarily have to be on social media, that if you just pick your podcast, or in the case of most of the people listening, your podcast, but that might be whatever else you want, as Felly said, but your podcast plus one other platform, and that other platform does not necessarily have to be social media if you are someone who really hates it or from a values point is really feeling frustrated. Guesting on other podcasts is a great way to do that. So how can we take some of that original content and translate that over into maybe pitching ourselves or having ideas of how can I take this and spin it to present it to an audience that isn't necessarily ours?
The first thing I would say is to do some kind of speaker reel. The easiest thing to do is to make a playlist on Spotify with all of your previous guest episodes or your top episodes from your show to showcase your speaking. I know even a lot of guests asks for examples of you speaking before they'll bring you on your show. If you did a mashup clip of a speaker reel, you could put that on YouTube and easily share it with people, or you could leave it in Google Drive and share the link if you don't want it public. I think most of us use email and have some kind of lead magnet that we are driving people towards. Repurposing your content to grow that email list and keep that email list engaged,
Mm.
and being able to say to the host, I have an engaged email list that I'll be sharing this episode with, can also be another selling point. But in terms of repurposing topics, I'm a big fan of looking at the shows you want to be applying for, the types of audience you want to be getting in front of, and twisting your topic to suit them. I can talk about repurposing for podcasters, repurposing for bloggers, repurposing for authors, right? And being able to make sure you have a way to make sure either your niche or your industry is centered, then you can change all the ways you talk about it around it.
Yes, I love that, and that's such a great point, and I think that we can when we really sit down and think about it, there's so many angles that we can take. So, for example, there was someone who did a 10-minute or less podcast interview, and I said I could talk about how to use your podcast as a marketing tool. When I got on, I had to have a list of ones that I could potentially talk about because she was like, "We've had a few people that kind of do what you do who are helping podcasters recently. Is there another angle that we can go with?" And I was like, "Yes, we could go." And then I gave her two options of like, we could go in this direction or we could go in this direction. And then I had another podcast where it wasn't necessarily for business owners, but it was more about like being a mom, but also maybe having side hustle stuff.
Mhm.
Here's my journey from side hustle to business owner. And here are all my mom tips and advice for newer moms. My kids are 10 and 7. So it's been a minute since they were little. Those first 2 years are super rough for a lot of people, I know. And so, like, how can I spin it? Another one was talking about content as a whole and my story of imposter syndrome and the person who said I have an annoying voice. And so I didn't want to launch a podcast because they said that thing about me that already tied into some insecurities I had. I think having that kind of bank of ideas of ways that you can spin things, those core stories, or like you said, even those, hey, I've got different freebies. And like, how can I take each of those freebies and turn those into selling points? And then, all right, you want the checklist of everything we talked about? Go to my website. Here you go. This is the free content. That is a great way to set yourself up to get a yes a lot easier than just like, hey, I want to be on your show. Cricket.
Yes. I was thinking about this yesterday because I use Threads a lot and people post like, does anyone do this? Or I'm looking for someone who does this. And you get the comments that are just me. No one's going to pick you for saying me. Like, it's the same when you're applying for podcasts, emailing hosts, whatever. Take the time to look at their podcast. Take your script and make sure you've made it relevant to the show. Make sure you're using the title, you're talking about the show, and then you're giving topic suggestions that are relevant. I run a show called The Unprofessional Entrepreneur. The amount of times people come to me and they're like, oh, I am a head leadership coach on LinkedIn, and these are my strategies. I'm just like, the show's called Unprofessional. You look so buttoned up in your email, you're an automatic no. Chill out, and maybe I'd accept you.
Yes. I love it. You have to do that background research and take the time, right?
Mhm.
If they say, hey, I want guests for the podcast, and then they give a link on where to apply, don't just comment and say, I want to be on. That's like, you're already setting yourself up for a no
Mhm.
because you're not following their proper procedures. That's another thing that just grinds my
Mm.
gears. Follow the procedure, guys. Anyway, this has been so good of like these strategies of repurposing. We've got tips for all of the different podcasters, no matter where you are in your journey, and especially talking about that podcast guesting, because that is the number one way to grow your show, or the quickest, I should say, way to grow your show is to guest on other shows and then redirect people back to your content. Because podcast listeners listen to podcasts and they'll probably listen to yours too. So thank you so much, Felly. If people are like, yeah, that's a lot and I need help and I need Felly in my life, where can they go to learn more about you and potentially work with you?
Yeah, so the best place you can head is my website, fellyday.com/services. And the first thing you'll see is a private podcast, because we love podcasting around here, that will walk you through my framework for repurposing. We talk about setting content intentions and using angles to repurpose better. If you are feeling burnt out and struggling to come up with content ideas, I have a service called the Remix, which is 100 custom content ideas from your existing content. I will dig in, listen to your podcast episodes, and pull out all the content you can create from your content.
Nice.
Or you can just hire me to do your content for you. Any of those you can find on the services page. I'm also on Threads at Felly Day and my podcast, Unprofessional Entrepreneur.
Awesome. We'll make sure we have links for that in the show notes for anyone who is driving or doing other things while they're listening. Thank you so much, Felly. This has been a blast.
Thank you.